There's little doubt that our country faces an extremely serious problem that has crept up on us in recent years. Successive opinion polls show that it's a major, if not the major, concern of the public. Yet there's been remarkably little meaningful discussion of immigration. Many tolerant and kindly people are deterred from raising the subject in public for fear of being accused by the liberal pro-immigration lobby of being anti-immigrant and racist. And this in turn results in the subject being left wide open to extremists such as the BNP, to whom such accusations are no deterrent, which is presumably what the pro-immigration lobby wanted to see in the first place. Is it any wonder then that ordinary people, afraid to raise their head above the parapet in this duel between right and left, become more and more frustrated? I'm perhaps more proof than most against these jibes, as I am an immigrant, having come to these shores from Australia after leaving school and having remained here ever since. But not, I hasten to add, as an illegal immigrant. Now, I'm going to bore the pants off you for a few minutes, and that's because I believe that to understand and place in perspective our country's present immigration policy, or lack of it, it's necessary to remind ourselves of the historical background. So those of you with a short attention span can safely doze off now. From medieval times, there's always been a simple distinction at common law between natural-born subjects of the monarch and aliens. If you were unfortunate enough to be born outside the dominion of the monarch, you were an alien. If you were born within his dominion, you were a British subject, irrespective of how alien you might have looked. Things were simple then, weren't they? But the government have recently sought to suggest that Britain is a nation of immigrants. Now that claim is rather hard to justify. In fact, historically, Britain had until quite recently one of the most settled populations in Europe. The largest flow, proportionately, was the Huguenots in the 16th and 17th centuries, but their influx was spread over a considerable period, and as European Protestants, their assimilation was relatively assured. When the British Empire came into existence, the dominion of the Crown expanded enormously, and with it, the number of British subjects. Because they now included not only those born within the UK, but also all those born throughout the self-governing dominions of Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and South Africa, as well as those in all the directly administered colonies. It was the ideal of empire, and later of the Commonwealth, that all British subjects had the right to come to the home country. Of course, in those days, and right up to the Second World War, none but the very rich could afford to do so, and thus maintaining the ideal of empire and Commonwealth didn't involve any major immigration into the UK. Now, although there'd been a statutory amendment to the common law in 1914, British Nationality and Status of Aliens Act, it wasn't until after the Second World War that the first major legislative change was introduced. This was the British Nationality Act of 1948. It was passed following agreement by the Commonwealth heads of government that the UK and the self-governing dominions would each adopt separate national citizenship but retain the common imperial status of British subject. Indeed, on a personal note, the Australian passport on which I travelled to England in the late 50s still described me as a British subject and an Australian citizen. The 1948 also created a new category of British subject, the Citizen of the United Kingdom and Colonies, CUKC, which covered all those British subjects of non-self-governing dominions, that is, the remaining colonies. The picture started to change in the 50s, with immigration in the order of 70,000 a year from countries of the new Commonwealth, the West Indies, Africa, and Asia. This led to considerable tension and unrest, and it became clear then that the ideal that every Commonwealth citizen had the right to come to England, the home country, could not be maintained once many started to exercise that right. The governments of the day were forced to introduce a number of legislative measures restricting these inflows, notably the Commonwealth Immigrants Act of 1962. The later expulsion of East African Asians holding CUKC passports from Uganda, of which incidentally only some 27,000 came to Britain, led to the Immigration Act of 1971, which introduced the concept of patriality or the right of abode, that restricted the right of entry into the UK largely to those either born here or with parents or grandparents born here. Now at this point, those who've nodded off should now wake up. The important point to make about all of this that I've said so far is that in those days, our Westminster Parliament was sovereign. A British government was able to react to events and to public opinion by taking whatever legislative action it thought fit. It had the sole and exclusive power to pass laws on any subject, and knew that if it failed to legislate on any matter on which the nation was largely united, electoral defeat would surely follow. It did not need the approval of any outside body, and it could not hide behind the excuse that it could do nothing because the subject matter was no longer within its competence or that the EU wouldn't allow it. Now let us jump forward to more recent times. For much of the 70s and 80s, immigration settled down to manageable proportions and didn't register with most people as being a particular problem. However, the European Economic Community, as it then was beginning to flex its muscles on immigration matters. Those who've studied the EU way of doing things will recognise the strategy. Stage one, the European Commission floats an idea. When it comes to public attention, its existence is denied. Stage two, the idea becomes a proposal. When that becomes public, we're told it's just an idea and nothing to worry about. Stage three, the Commission pushes the proposal through a Council of Ministers meeting and it becomes a directive. When that's released to the press, the official line is that its effect will not be nearly as bad as any independent experts might say. And stage four, finally, the directive is converted into a statutory instrument and goes through Westminster, usually on the nod, at which stage the relevant minister will get up and say, well, it's really too late to do anything about it, old boy, and anyway, we had no choice. We handed over power to legislate on that subject years ago. No wonder politicians of all parties end up loving the EU. It's the perfect comfort blanket for them. Let me give you an example of this procedure. On the 15th of June 1990, John Major signed the Dublin Convention, which handed over to the EU competency for rules relating to refugees and asylum seekers. This was a ticking time bomb with a delayed fuse, because it was not to come into force until the 1st of September 1997. One can only assume that this regular feature of EU legislation is designed to allow national leaders who sign away their country's powers sufficient time to get away from the crime scene before the results of their actions are felt, and for the public to become confused as to who was responsible. That's particularly apt in this case, for in the words of Christopher Booker in his History of the EU, The Great Deception, he says, the Dublin Convention was to cause the UK immense problems. Now let us move now from the method by which the EU takes control of policy to the practical effects of its control. Immigrants come in many guises. Those from non-EU countries, such as asylum seekers, refugees, economic migrants, illegal immigrants, and legal ones. Then there are those from other EU countries. There's much confusion in the media and in public debate generally about all these categories. So let's take a closer look. An asylum seeker is a person who's applied for asylum under the 1951 Convention on the Status of Refugees. And it will be on the ground that if he's returned to his country of origin, he has a well-founded fear of persecution on account of race, religion, nationality, political belief, or membership of a particular social group. He remains an asylum seeker for so long as his application or an appeal against refusal of his application is pending. A refugee is an asylum seeker whose application has been successful. In its broader context, it can mean a person who is fleeing, for example, civil war or natural disaster, but not necessarily fearing persecution as defined by the 1951 Convention. And an economic migrant is a person who's left his own country and seeks by lawful or unlawful means to find employment in another country. Now remember also that these three terms relate only to nationals of countries outside the EU. Every citizen of all 27 member states of the EU has the right to tip up on our doorstep and be admitted. But that comes later. Returning to asylum seekers, we all remember Sangatte, the camp the French located as far away as possible from their point of entry into France, and surprise, surprise, as close to Britain as it was possible for them to get without actually invading us. And of course, close enough to the Channel Tunnel that even the most short-sighted and lethargic refugee couldn't miss both seeing and catching the half-hourly trains to Waterloo. Oh, and I never did quite understand when the rules required that all asylum seekers be accepted by the first EU member state they arrived in, how we came to be saddled with them all. That must be one of the benefits to France of their EU membership. Anyway, the number of official, and this is official applications for asylum, almost trebled from 30,000 in 1996 to 84,000 in 2002. Now, whilst it's true that subsequent years have shown a significant fall, they went down to 26,000 in 2005 and were about the same last year. All these figures exclude dependents. If they are added, the total for the year 2002 alone would have been 103,000. The final figures will be even higher, since those granted asylum can subsequently bring in non-accompanying dependents, and in due course their children can bring in spouses, so new and continuing sources of immigration are being generated. Despite the recent fall in applications, the UK still received more asylum applications in 2006 than almost any other European country. France had slightly more, but I'm tempted to say that we all now know how she reduces those numbers. But what about those who are refused asylum? Between 1997 and 2006, 540,000 applications were heard, of which 62% have been refused asylum and discretionary leave to stay. However, only about a quarter of those refused are believed to have left the country. That's the asylum statistics for UK, period 1997 to 2006. That means that even allowing for those who've been removed, from this period alone, there are more than 250,000 failed asylum seekers, plus their dependents, still in the country. But it doesn't end there. Under EU law, anyone granted asylum by any of the other 26 member states cannot be stopped by our government from taking up residence here. And given that if asylum seekers have a second language, it's likely to be English, that seems highly probable. And what is the cost? Well, by law, every asylum seeker has to be provided with free accommodation, health care, children's education, a cash allowance, and legal aid. This no doubt explains why the cost to the taxpayer of the Immigration and Nationality Directorate, the IND, of the Home Office, which is the department responsible for asylum seekers, was £1.89 billion in 2003-04. But it's all right. It fell to only £1.5 billion in 2005-06, and it's expected to stay at that level for the following 2 years of 2006 and 2007. On top of all that, the legal aid bill came to a further £204 million in 2003. Then there's the cost of the courts, for which the government has given no separate estimate. What started out as a simple duty of compassion under the 1951 Geneva Convention has been turned into a legal and judicial nightmare following the coming into force in October 2000 of the Human Rights Act of 1998, which is our old friend the Charter of Human Rights. Most asylum seekers now routinely contend that if they're returned to their countries of origin, they'll be at risk of having their human rights infringed. Now we turn to illegal immigrants. It's been said that an illegal immigrant is simply one who hasn't yet made an application to be an asylum seeker. After years of claiming that it was impossible to estimate the number of illegal immigrants in the UK, the Home Office finally produced an estimate in June 2005. This compared the number of foreign citizens subject to immigration control who were recorded in the 2001 UK census with the number of foreign citizens who had outstanding permissions to be in the UK in 2001. The difference was the best available estimate of the illegal population. This methodology gave an estimate of between 310,000 and 570,000 illegal immigrants in 2001, with a central estimate of 430,000. My reaction when reading this report was that if I was an illegal immigrant at the time of the 2001 census, I'd make myself very scarce on the night that the form had to be filled in, wouldn't you? However, Migration Watch, that excellent independent research body initiated by our former British ambassador to Saudi Arabia and Syria, Sir Andrew Green, has produced a research paper that casts considerable doubt on the Home Office figures. Their paper shows that, apart from being 4 years out of date, the Home Office took no account of failed asylum seekers in subsequent years, nor of any children born of the illegal immigrants. The conclusion of the Migration Watch paper was that the numbers of illegal immigrants in the UK at the end of March 2005 was more likely to be approaching 870,000. And anecdotally, it's now said to be more than 1 million people. Then there's legal immigration. Once again, not to be confused with those who flooded into Britain from Eastern Europe since the 2004 enlargement of the EU, and whose entry we're powerless to stop. No, this is legal immigration from countries outside the EU, which used to run at around 50,000 per annum up until the late 90s. It now runs at more than 140,000 per annum. Now, the pro-immigration lobby likes to talk about Europe's need for immigrants. This may possibly be true for some such as Italy or Spain, who have a fertility rate as low as 1.2. Ours is 1.7, just fairly short of the figure needed to ensure that a population replaces itself. But that's light years in demographic terms from their situation. The plain fact is that our population is far from declining. Even on the government's own projections, it's set to grow by 5.6 million over the next 3 decades. This is equivalent to 5 times the population of Birmingham, and 85% of the increase will be due to immigrants and their descendants. Here in the southeast of England, where more than 4 out of 5 migrants are settling, we're already one of the most crowded areas of Europe. Indeed, England as a whole is now more densely populated than India. Geographically, the fact that Britain is an island has in the past enabled us to impose tight controls at our borders, allowing almost total freedom once inside. Unlike countries in continental Europe, that share common land boundaries, we've been able to avoid the intrusiveness of constant internal identity checks. But our membership of the EU is changing all that. Historically, our links with a worldwide Commonwealth and the status of English as a universal second language make us a much more attractive destination than nearly all the other EU countries put together. Furthermore, our welfare system and the ready availability of the NHS to all and sundry are an even greater lure. The basic problem is that other Europeans have as a fundamental objective an aim which is at odds with both our history and our disposition. It's set out at the very beginning of the relevant section of the reconstituted European Constitution, where it says, "The Union shall develop a policy with a view to ensuring the absence of any controls on persons, whatever their nationality, when crossing internal borders." So in this field, as in others, we simply don't fit. Yet our government in 2004 gave up its national veto and accepted the principle of qualified majority voting to Europe's asylum and immigration policy. To block a proposal, as Mark has already pointed out, we need at least 90 votes out of a total of 345. Yet Britain has only 29 votes. What is more, which is what Mark has said, we have no natural allies, as nobody else, with the possible exception of Ireland, shares our interests. Now, if we are to successfully stop any proposal, we have to horse trade in the smoke-filled rooms of the European Commission, where every vote we garner is paid for by concessions elsewhere. Why do our politicians do it? As if to underline the point, earlier this month came news that the EU plans to throw open its doors and make it even easier for immigrants from non-EU countries to migrate and work here. Even with our present opt-out, and even if the resurrected EU constitution is again rejected, we won't be able to stop this further wave of immigration, because once these immigrants gain citizenship of another EU country, they are entitled to free movement throughout the whole 27 member states. Which brings me neatly and finally to the wave of incomers from the new EU countries. From the 1st of May 2004, when 8 East European countries joined the EU, until the end of 2006, 510,000 applicants had registered under the government's Workers' Registration Scheme, of which 63% came from Poland. But the self-employed are not required to register. A Home Office minister, Mr. McNulty, long since gone, estimated the total over just 2 years at 600,000. It's not known how many have since returned home. It's reported that about half of those registered say that their employment is temporary. When I read that, I couldn't help thinking of the immortal words of Mandy Rice Davies when it was put to her by counsel that John Profumo had said that he had not had sexual relations with her, to which she replied, "Well, he would say that, wouldn't he?" Even if they have all returned, net immigration from Eastern Europe would still be about 150,000 a year, compared to the government's prediction of a maximum of 13,000. Since then, we've had an unknown number of new immigrants from the 2 latest additions to the growing list of EU members, Romania and Bulgaria. Once again, our government can do nothing to stop their entry because they are now EU citizens, and EU law provides that each of the 490 million persons that make up the 27-member EU has the right of free movement and abode throughout every other member state. Legal immigration alone, at the present projected rate, will lead to a requirement of about 1.5 million additional houses in the period up to 2026. There are a whole host of knock-on effects as well, from the changing nature of our cities. In the last 10 years, 600,000 Londoners have left the city to be replaced by 700,000 immigrants. To increased pressure on our health, education and transport systems, to increases in violent crime, particularly those involving knives, down to increased costs to public bodies such as the police, for translators and interpreters in order to deal with those who speak little English. In presenting these facts to you today, I've tried to remain as objective as possible. I've just skimmed the surface of what is a particularly complex and emotive issue. I have to say, however, that it seems to me that the immigration and asylum policies being pursued by the European Union are designed to break down the unique character and culture of individual nation states such as Britain, so that they may be more easily assimilated into a single centralised unit governed entirely by the European Commission. The question which I have long pondered, and to which I have still not found a satisfactory answer, is why do our politicians collaborate in the destruction of our country? I'm going to ask Michael Shumpton to share the questions with me because, as will become clear when I introduce him later, he is a considerable expert on immigration, and in fact, if I'd known that before, I would perhaps not have been tempted to give the speech that I did.
What you said was right.
Thank you. So I'm sure we have some questions. The first one I'll take is from Malcolm Ward in there.
Oh, thank you, David. There's another one. I don't know whether you recollect, David, but a while ago I made a present of Vladimir Bukowski tape to you. Now, if you recollect, he makes reference to the fact that everybody was talking about taking vast numbers of immigrants from outside the European Union. He couldn't understand this. You recollect this passage. Can I remind you of something which he said twice? He said, they are deliberately creating a massive problem. Deliberately creating a massive problem. Various advantages to them. Well, his best one was that they would make us all feel guilty. Anybody who spoke against this would be feeling guilty, and they could send us for counselling. Have you been to
Is that a question or a comment?
It's a statement of the
truth.
Yes.
whether you remember what Bukowski said, because he answered your question.
Oh, I see. Right. All right. Yes, I'm sure I did. I don't recall it, but I'm sure it was there. Gentleman here at the end of the row. Yes.
I come from Selsley, and there are a lot of foreign workers there. And one of the things that you notice when you go into the bank is the number of foreign workers there paying money in. Now, our government tells us that these foreign workers aid our national economy, and yet a finance minister from one of the other EU countries, I think it was Poland, but I'm not absolutely sure, said, you do realise that your country is sending to our country about £4 billion every year from these workers. So this is a lie. They don't add to our economy, they take away from it.
You're right there.
Yes. Michael should speak on that.
Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. The questioner is absolutely right. There's no, Andrew Green, I've had lunch with Andrew and done some private papers for Migration Watch. There is no net economic benefit to the UK from immigration. There's certainly no net benefit from the EU, and one of the damaging things about immigration is the extent to which funds are remitted abroad. There's a substantial drain on sterling. It's certainly in excess of £10 billion a year remitted funds. 4 billion for Poland sounds about right just for one country. Now, this drain of sterling out of the country is helping to force up interest rates because where you have a substantial drain of funds from the country, one of the mechanisms which a central bank has to use in order to keep the value of the currency high is to increase interest rates. Now, nobody at the Bank of England is prepared to go public with the impact of immigration on interest rates and how much lower interest rates in the UK could be without net outflows from immigration. But I suspect that it's not less than 50 basis points. In other words, we could be reducing our interest rates by half a percentage point just as a replacement for remitted funds abroad. But it is a very, very substantial problem indeed. Very few EU immigrants invest in this country. Almost none have brought capital with them. Almost none of the immigrants that have arrived in the UK after 1973, when the Immigration Act came into force, have brought in capital into the country. A very small percentage, less than 1% perhaps, have. The rest have not. So it's a major economic problem. The Bank of England are aware of it. The Treasury are aware of it. The public are not, because they're not being told the facts.
Thank you very much. Rosemary Conway.
I found your talk extremely interesting, and I'd like a copy of it if any are available, if you're able to give it out, because I couldn't get down on the statistics. What I would like to ask is, are you and other people here aware there is an organisation called Optimum Population Trust, which has campaigned for years to draw attention to government and people of this country, and indeed there are similar organisations in all countries, of the urgent need for governments and politicians to adopt population policies, because without them all of our problems are simply insoluble, and yet there's an almost complete ban, which the gentleman talking about free speech, really, about talking about population. I've gone to meeting after meeting to raise this issue, on all sorts of things like housing and taxation. It's never mentioned. I would urge everybody here, typing into Google Optimum Population Trust, it'll come up on Google. They've got a website like Migration Watch has. Basically, they're saying that our country, with over 60 million people, already has 3 times the number of people in it that is to make an environmentally sustainable footprint. And that's true globally as well. We've got 6.5 billion people in the world. It's going to be half as many again by the year 2050. Until these issues people realise how they affect everything, and that all their problems are insoluble without talking about them, they'll never be solved. None of our problems will. So I would urge you to take on board that and join.
I'm sure we'll certainly keep a watch out and make a point of looking out for Optimum Population Trust. But I think that the important thing to remember here is that we wish to be able to control our own affairs within this country. The one statistic, I think, above all else, that astonished me when I was doing the research for this speech was that we are now more crowded per capita than India. I mean, that is absolutely astonishing. And there's nothing that our government can do about it unless they leave the EU. That's what we should be saying. We want to be able to control our own affairs. Now, I know that Mark wanted to ask a question. I think probably of Michael Shrimpton, wasn't it?
Well, David and Michael, actually. I just wanted to ask, you mentioned quite correctly that quite often the charge of racism is levelled at anybody who questions the migration arrangements. We have a crazy situation at the moment where if you're from the EU and thus vastly likely to be white, you have free access to Britain as a migrant. If you are, on the other hand, say from India, and thus have a much better understanding, for example, of things like the British legal system, you and your family might well have actually fought alongside Britain in our defence over centuries, or other parts of the Commonwealth, you don't have that right. Would you agree that's an opportunity to actually turn around that charge of racism against the European Union and actually emphasise that the Commonwealth was an inclusive organisation?
I think you want to speak to that first.
Yep, I've made that point for many years, that that there are countries with non-white populations who have far closer cultural ties, who understand the rules of cricket even if their national teams don't always abide by them. No names, no pack drill, no reference to the chucking at the Lord's Test match. That dismissal of Paul Collingwood. You're from Northampton, aren't you? Good man, Paul Collingwood. So even if their teams don't always abide by the rules, they at least understand the rules, even when they're breaking them. Yes, it is an Indian is far more likely to assimilate into the UK and far more welcome than a Pole. Speaks the language, understands cricket, plays it, speaks English better than we do, and grandfather may have fought in the 14th Army, as opposed to fighting against it. So, on the whole, non-white immigrants from the Commonwealth are more likely to assimilate than white immigrants from Eastern Europe. But I make this point, it depends whereabouts in the Commonwealth, and I'm not encouraging mass immigration from the Commonwealth, because I think it's perfectly clear that we've reached the stage where uncontrolled mass immigration, or indeed mass immigration of any sort, controlled or uncontrolled, can no longer continue. We don't have the space, we don't have the room, and we don't have the resources. And it also depends very much on where in the Commonwealth these immigrants are coming from. Now, there is one particular area where there has been a gross failure of assimilation with tragic consequences, and that, of course, is assimilation of the Muslim population. Now, although some Muslims have assimilated and make very good citizens, the fact is a substantial minority have not. And, of course, the Muslim immigration tends to come from the Commonwealth, not exclusively. And Muslim immigration has been a failure. It's as simple as that. The Muslim population, by and large, are not assimilated. It's a major security problem, as we've seen. It's a major social problem. And the point I'm making is not in any way controversial. It's exactly the same point that was made by the chairman of the Commission for Racial Equality in the CRE's outgoing report. There is an increasing divide in this country, and that Muslim and non-Muslim populations are in no way integrated. So it depends. The Hindu and Sikh populations of India have assimilated by and large very well indeed. With African countries, you just take it on a country-by-country basis. East African Asians from Uganda assimilated very well. West Africa, less successful in terms of integration. So you judge each person on his merits, as I do, and you take each country on its merits and each type of immigrant population. You don't lumber all non-white or white immigrants together. You look at them sector by sector, country by country. Some are better than others at fitting into our society.
Thank you. I'll take Toby in the centre.
The Australians have done reasonably well.
I'll come back to you on that in a moment.
I'd just like to say, I come from Surrey. I know you hate to go to Surrey, and you are right, by the way. It's getting totally overcrowded. You can't drive from Weybridge to Addleston anymore without basically going round through Hampshire, really. Oh, sorry. I will use the mic. Do I have to press a button?
No.
We say that immigration should be limited and appeal to people to act in the interest of these islands.
Yes. Yeah. Immigration is something I've practiced in 25 years. I came to immigration from the point of view of acting for immigrants. And in my trendy lefty youth, it's a long way behind me now, in my trendy lefty youth, I was a law centre barrister, and I specialised in representing immigrants. And it's a subject I've known pretty well for over a quarter of a century now, as a judge and as a barrister and as a policymaker. The one point that is consistently made from within the ethnic minority community is they want controls on immigration.
Absolutely.
The communities which are settled here, which have done well, absolutely do not want to see continued mass immigration. It's quite an extraordinary thing, but communities which trust the British don't necessarily trust. You might get more trust in the British from a Hindu immigrant than he would have trust in, say, a fellow Muslim immigrant of the same colour, also from India. Remember, there are huge tensions in India, for example, huge communal tensions between Sikhs, Hindus, and Muslims. The populations to the south here do not want to see further mass immigration. They are alarmed at events like 7/7, and if you speak privately, they're sometimes not able to make this point in public, you speak privately to representatives of the ethnic minority communities on the subject of immigration, and I've been doing this for 25 years, most will tell you that they want to see strict limits on immigration. In short, they understand that the country is essentially full. That once you get to the stage where in order to accommodate further immigrants, you've got to concrete over large parts of the southeast and jam up the transport networks, that there really is, our population density is probably at the right stage now. We really don't want to have a denser population. And they also understand the dangers of increased immigration for communal tensions. They've seen it in their own countries. They don't necessarily want to see Britain going down the same road. And the signs are already there. 7/7, race riots, having to cover up racially motivated murders of whites by non-whites, where the police tend to try and downgrade it or push the crimes to one side. You can already see the tensions there, particularly in the inner cities, but not just in the inner cities. So I would have no hesitation in campaigning in an ethnic minority neighbourhood on the basis of controls on immigration, providing it's emphasised that those who are here lawfully settled are very welcome. Those who live here and abide by our laws are very welcome, and providing the points are made, as I'm sure they would be, in a reasonable way.
Thank you. I'm just going to take one more question, and the gentleman up there has already had one slice of the cherry, bite of the cherry. Gentleman there sitting 2 rows down.
I'd just like to ask you, to what extent do you believe that the statements of churchmen in this country have aggravated the immigration problem?
We don't have the Archbishop of Canterbury here, do we? Is that doppelganger in the foreground? I hope you took that in good answer. Yes, bearded lefties in the Church of England, frankly not helping. As you all know, ladies and gentlemen, your ideal Church of England bishop is one who believes not necessarily in God, but in the Tory party, the MCC and steam engines in that order. A belief in God is not necessarily barred to promotion in the Church of England, as we all know, but it's not encouraged. And frankly, some of the bishops we've got at the moment simply don't understand what the Church of England bishop is all about. The Church of England bishop should have an elderly Rolls Royce, should live in a palace, preferably a cold palace, so he gets a bit of sympathy for the poor, but a large drafty palace, drive in a large drafty old Rolls Royce, be a member of MCC, come along to the test matches, support his local voluntary steam engine steam railway, and vote Tory. And be nice, and know how to mind his P's and Q's and how to address the Queen probably when he goes to the annual garden party at Lovely Palace. That's what we want from the Church of England. No more trendy lefty, bearded lefty archbishops. Thank you very much. That's just my question.
I think on that note, I'll call that part of the meeting to a close.
Beards are all right in the Navy, but not in the Church of England.
We're now going to move swiftly on because we're still...